Thank you for checking out this bonus edition of the 12 Kyle podcast. I am 12 Kyle. Listen, this is a special episode because it is my 400th episode. Wow. 400 episodes. I can't even believe I did. I'm looking around like, how the hell did I do 400 episodes? Yeah, so I want to thank you all for listening and tuning in as you do each and every week. This is it's weird, but it's cool because like I didn't even know. Like I just happened to be looking at something, and it said $3.99. I'm like, wait a minute. I was like, you mean to tell me I've done 399 episodes? So my next episode is going to be 400. So I knew that this was going to be my 400th episode, but I really did stumble upon the numbers because it's not something I keep up with and I don't number my episodes. So, gotta say thank you. Thank you. I'm just as surprised as you are. In fact, I might be a little bit more surprised because I think when I started the podcast back in 2016, I didn't have any vision of making the 400 episodes. What was interesting was, and I'll just share the story with you. A couple of weeks ago, my niece, Taylor, who is a senior in college, she hit me up. She said, "Hey, Uncle Kyle." She's my oldest niece, and she said, "Hey, Uncle Kyle, I got she was doing something for a communications class." And she said, "Can I interview you?" And I said, "Yeah." She said, "I want to interview you about your podcast." I was like, "Okay, cool." So she called me and we talked. And like one of the first questions she said was, "Well, why do you have a podcast?" And I was like, "Because," but I knew that wasn't a good answer. So we kind of laughed about that. But I explained to her, how I actually got started with the podcast. As many of you know, maybe you don't know, I had a internet radio show. It was called the 12 Radio Show. I did that show for 5 years. It was a 2-hour show live every Wednesday night from 9 to 11 p.m. And over the period of time, particularly like the end of that fourth year, going into the middle of that fourth year, I was like, it wasn't as many people listening live. More people were listening to it later because, I mean, think about it. It's hard to keep someone's attention for 2 hours. And so talked to some people, talked to my boy Eclectic, and they were just like, "Why don't you just make it a podcast?" And so I did that. And, that was my answer to her, but it still made me think about it. Okay, well, why do you have a podcast? That's how I got started, but why? Why do you do this? And honestly, and it's going to sound cliche, but I love doing it. I mean, it's a cool thing for me to do. I do a bunch of cool shit in my life. And this is one of them. What I get out of this podcast is a lot. And I hope that you get something from it too. But I get a lot out of it. I think the thing for me is a lot of the conversations. In fact, almost all of the conversations that you hear on this podcast, whether it be me or me and a co-host, every conversation is a conversation that I would have probably anywhere else in the world. I just happen to have a microphone in front of me. And to say that I've done it for 400 episodes is a huge accomplishment. So it's something that I'm definitely proud of. I'm definitely proud and happy to be at 400 episodes. One of the things that I love about this podcast is on this podcast, I'm authentically me. I mean, what you see is what you get. I'm not going to dress things up. I'm not going to come on here, and try to be someone that I'm not. I'm going to give you me raw and uncut. And I always tell people, like, 12 Kyle and Kyle are the same person. Like, I don't put on, a magic hat or go into some type of personality switch once I turn this microphone on. In fact, 12 Kyle might be a little bit nicer than Kyle because Kyle can be an asshole at times. Maybe, depending on who you ask. But that's the thing about this podcast is that I'm able to be authentically me and give you what it is that I want to talk about. Surprisingly or not, in 400 episodes, I've made no money off this podcast. And that may come as a surprise to you because, like, there are some people, particularly those who don't really know a lot of podcasters, there's some people who will assume that because you have a podcast, it makes money. Now, there are quite a few podcasts that do make money. This one doesn't. And I'm okay with that. Like, I make a few dollars at my job, right? Shut up, King Germ. I make a few dollars at my job, so I'm okay cash wise. Like, I don't have to, peddle the podcast for money. Will I take money for this podcast? Depends. I've been approached about some things in years past, but it's got to be the right situation. And I would never get into doing this and having to compromise what it is that I do. For example, like, I don't want to go, I'll just say join the Joe Budden network. and say, okay, well, hey, yeah, you can come on the Joe Budden network where you're going to have your podcast here. You're going to make X amount of dollars. But we need you to kind of lean in and talk more about relationships and dating and the married life. No. No, because that's not authentically me. And not to say that I don't touch on those topics, because obviously you've listened for 400 episodes. There's been topics of that nature. But I don't want anybody telling me what to do. I don't want nobody telling me what to do. I don't want nobody saying, well, hey, you can't have eclectic on because all you guys talk is hip hop and it's too much hip hop talk. Nah, fuck that. I'm going to talk about whatever I want to talk about with whom I want to talk about it with. So if I want to get on here and beatbox for 7 minutes, then damn it, that's what it's going to be. But I would entertain and still will entertain any offers. But as far as this being a money-making venture, no, it's not a money-making venture. There are several podcasts, a lot of podcasts that do make money, and shout out to anybody that can turn this thing into $1. Big shout out to those who make money and it becomes their job. And they quit their 9-to-5. Now it would take a lot for me to quit my 9-to-5 and, move on to just to give you the podcast, weekly or whatever. But no, I'm cool where I am. And like I said, it's because the podcast is authentically me. I'm not looking to change it. I remember a couple weeks ago, I was talking to my man D Murph. Shout out to D Murph, podcaster extraordinaire. You've heard him on here. And Murph said, man, what do you want to do with this podcast? And I said without hesitation, I said, Murph, I just want to do dope shit. I want to put out a dope podcast every single time. Why? Because I feel like I have a dope ass podcast. I feel like I feel like it's the greatest podcast in the world. And I'm not in any competition with anyone because I run in my own lane. I'm the horse with the blinders on. I run in my lane. Do I have peers? Of course I do. All of the people that you've heard on this podcast over 400 episodes are my peers. More than a few of them are my friends. And I say this, in all love. I love their podcasts, and that's why I've been on their podcasts, and that's why I listen to their podcasts and so forth and so on, and vice versa for me. But at the end of the day, I just want to do dope shit. That's it. Every time I want to make sure that I'm putting out the best product available. It's like cook crack. I don't want to put out no bad crack. I want to put out some shit that everybody can get high off of, for whether it be 20 minutes, 40 minutes, or an hour, whatever the case is. That's it. And I don't want to ever slip, because I feel like, as I mentioned earlier, I had a radio show over those 5 years. I think there were times, if I look back and I'm honest with myself, I think there were times that I probably put out some episodes that I probably didn't give my best effort, and I probably wasn't at my best, or I probably did an episode on something that, I felt like people wanted to hear, as opposed to me telling you what it is that I feel like talking about, because that's what the 12 Kyle podcast is. I have a list of topics. I have a list of things that I want to talk about. I keep them in folders on my computer. I keep notes in my phone. Shout out to Eclectic, who gave me that idea one day, which I thought, he didn't even know it, but I thought it was a brilliant idea, because I had stuff in emails and the stuff was all scrambled all over the place. And one day we were texting, and he said, "Hey man," he's like, "just as in your notes, such and such such." He's like, "I put it in my notes," and I'm like, "Notes on your iPhone?" He's like, "Yeah." And I was like, I wasn't even using the notes app until he told me that. But that's what I do. So it's like, I just want to make sure that I am covering the topics that I want to talk about. A lot of times it's stuff that I've read. Obviously, if it's music, I'm going to go into a deep dive about the music that I grew up listening to. And then I'm going to give you stories about my life. And then any and everything in between. I don't talk about current events. I don't knock people that do, but that ain't my bag. I'm sorry. I mean, honestly, I don't care about half the shit that pops up on the Shade Room. Do I know what it is? Some of it, because my homegirl Shelly Shell will send it to me, but I don't care. I don't care to talk about it. I'll put it like that publicly. But yeah, like I told Murph, I just want to do dope shows. I just want to do dope shit each and every time that I crack open this microphone. The thing that has gotten more interesting for me over the years is, especially when I come across people who either I grew up with or people that I went to school with, and they say that they've listened to the podcast. Like, I've gone to homecoming for my high school, homecoming for my college, and you're talking to people like, "Man, I heard the episode when you talked about blah 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 blah. Oh man, I listen to the podcast all the time." And then they start telling you about episodes, and you're like, "Wow, I did not know that you actually listened to the podcast." Because here's the thing, I don't know who listens, other than my friends, other than the people who hit me up on Twitter. I have no idea who listens to this podcast. But I gotta, even in saying that, I gotta shout out those who listen, and more importantly, shout out to the silent listeners. And what I mean by that is, there's somebody listening right now that has probably never sent a tweet, never sent an Instagram message or anything like that, but listens faithfully. And I have no interaction with them, but they listen and they're hooked on this podcast, and I appreciate them for that. I don't check the numbers, so I don't know where they are. They could be in Timbuktu. Is Timbuktu a place? I don't know. But yeah, it's so I'm always surprised when people say they listen. But on the flip side of that, confidently and borderline arrogantly, I'm like, oh yeah, you should listen. The reason being is that, like I said, it's a dope podcast, and it's like, I feel like when I put something out, it's worth listening to. Now, I do understand that everybody's not going to listen to every single podcast episode. It's just not possible, because my subjects change. So if I'm talking about, I don't know, a Redman album, do I expect Maya from the We Did That Shit podcast to listen to it? Maybe, maybe not. Probably not. But if I'm talking about dating and relationships, do I expect the Eclectic to listen to it? Probably not. But somebody else will. And so I'm always cool or always happy when people listen. And I'm even more surprised when people that I know tell me that they listen. But I'm thankful. I'm thankful for them, and I'm thankful for the silent listeners as well. Um, 400 episodes. I gotta say thank you to my guests. It's too many of you to name. At some point, I'll probably, man, who knows, if get to 500, or I shouldn't say if. When I get to 500, maybe I'll shout everybody out on that episode. But thank you for my guests, because it's not easy to book guests. Actually, it is pretty easy, but the hardest thing is, kind of correlating schedules. And what I try to do is anytime I get an episode and I say, okay, hey, I'm going to do this particular episode with this particular podcaster or these particular podcasters. I try to make sure that my schedule is available and I work around their schedule. I'll say, hey, I'm free this day, this day, this day. And then whatever time that they say works, we make it happen. And I try to do the same when I'm on, with other people as well. But yeah, my guests, thank you. Thank way too many of you for me to name. But thank you for your time and thank you for your talents. Because here's the thing, I'm not bringing anybody on this podcast who's not talented. Period. There's some people on here who've asked to be on the podcast and we just haven't had it happen yet, but it will happen. But for the most part, everybody who's been on this podcast is talented enough to be on this podcast. If not, they would not be on this podcast at all. And I mean that. And obviously I have to thank my family. My wife, Sharice, my kids, Dion, Cameron, Brandon, and Skylar. It's a sacrifice. And what I mean by that is no, I'm not missing Skylar's tennis matches to do podcasts. But if it's a Saturday afternoon and I don't know, and it's 5:00, I could be outside playing catch with my sons. Or could be in the driveway shooting hoops. But I'm inside and I'm recording an episode sometimes. Not often, but sometimes. Or even if it's, because normally when I record, it's late at night. Or sometimes I record in the morning. It just depends on. And that's another great thing about being a solo podcaster is that I'm not bound to anybody's time. I'm very respectful, of everybody's time. But there are no time constraints for me when it comes to recording. Because almost all of my, well, not all, but most of my episodes are just me by myself. So if I wake up at 5 a.m. and I feel like recording, I can do that. If I wake up if it's 2:00 in the afternoon and I feel like recording, I can do that. I work from home. So if I feel like, making my lunch break a podcast, I can do that. I've done that before plenty of time. So, it just depends. But I love the fact that my family gives me that flexibility. And if I say, hey, I'm recording, I'm recording. And we have a family calendar. I put it on the calendar so they know when it's coming. But, I'm not missing any dance recitals or anything like that, or any baseball games or football games with my kids, or a date with my wife, and just to do a podcast. No, I'm not doing that. But I'm respectful of it. And they're very respectful of me and my time. And I come into my office in my house and, they stay out the way. And they're very supportive, and I appreciate them for that. I love them. I love them regardless, obviously, but I know that may or may not be easy. And every now and then I'll start a podcast and Skylar will peek her head in and she might have a question, or she might want to see what's going on or something like that. And I show them, but the kids really don't listen to this podcast. They'll listen sometimes. Same for Sharice. She'll listen sometimes. She's been on here, obviously. But I'm very thankful for them, and I'm very blessed to have them, because everybody doesn't have that kind of support system. And to make it to 400 episodes, you do need good people, great people around you. Lastly, what's next for the 12 Kyle podcast? At the time of this recording, which is, I need to put that on a shirt. At the time of this recording, I did not realize that I had said it so much on so many episodes, but until one day, Jay Boog, shout out to Jay Boog, and I think it was Autumn and somebody else that we were on Twitter, and they were saying like some of my 12 Kyleisms, if you will, and that's one of them at the time of this recording. And the reason why I say at the time of this recording is because it's a way of time stamping what it is that I'm saying, because I don't talk about current events. So there's no way for anybody, if somebody listens to this podcast 50 years from now, and I hope and pray that it will be around 50 plus years from now, they'll have an idea as to what was going on or what was happening in the world, other than the fact that they can look and see what time it was. But, I tell people all the time, particularly podcasters, like that era in the height of the pandemic, you really needed to be documenting and recording, because nobody's going to believe this shit. Nobody's going to believe that you lived through a global pandemic and that, people were getting this virus that was killing everybody or making people sick, and how life got flipped upside down for everybody. So, I think that's one of those things where you got to document it. But yeah, so I will say from time to time at the time of this recording, but yeah, at the time of this recording, what's next for the 12 Kyle podcast? Well, I am under contract for 2023. So here's the thing that I do. There's a contract that I sign, and it's just an annual contract, because I never believe in starting something and not finishing it. So, when it came time to the end of, or moving into the Q3 of 2022, it was time for contract negotiations. Okay, hey, are you going to come back in 2023? I was like, yeah, I'll do it. And who knows, in 2023, I don't know, the way these episodes have been cranked out, I might hit 500 next year. I don't know. I'm not going to put out a bunch of episodes just to hit 500. No, it'll happen when it happens. I know that there was a 300th episode, but I don't know when that was. Maybe 2021, I guess. 2020, maybe. So yeah, under contract for 2023. I'm going to keep doing this podcast as long as I have something to say, and as long as I can do it now. I mean, like, I have the time to do it. If it got to a point where I didn't have the time to do it, then I'm not doing it. But I do have time, and as you can see, I've had plenty of time to do bonus episodes, have guests on. The goal is just to put out an episode every single week, with the exception of the week of my birthday, which is December 9th. No episodes that week. And actually this year, my birthday falls on a Friday, I think. Yeah. So, as far as I know, everything is a go for next year. And then after that, we'll, sometime during the middle of next year, I'll figure out and sit down and do the contract thing or not do the contract thing. I don't know. But the plan is to keep giving y'all dope shit. And based on the folders and stuff that I have as far as topics and stuff, trust me, I have not run out of things to talk about, because I'm constantly reading things. I'm constantly coming across things. The only thing I think, probably there'll be subtle changes going forward. I'm probably not going to do as many anniversary dates for music podcast episodes. I'll still do them, but I'm just gonna, I'm not waiting for, let's say I did a breakdown of Anita Baker's Rapture album. I'm not waiting until the album turns 40 for me to do a breakdown. Like, if I want to do it January 13th, then that's what it'll be. Period. Because I feel like, a lot of times, it's particularly with those music episodes, I'm able to introduce some people to music that was dope, that either they weren't around for or they just don't remember. Or for those who were around, and they reminisce. But no, I'm not running out of topics. Not anytime soon. Trust me. I have enough topics at the time of this recording that will last me at least another 4 months. And that's not even doing bonus episodes. So I've got some things that already been recorded that I'll put out. And I like to record that. I like to also, that's another benefit of, being a solo podcast is that I can record whenever and I can put it out whenever. So it's not like, I'm rushing, and I like to record sometimes ahead of time because maybe, just maybe, there's a particular week where it's busy and I really can't sit down and record. Now, the one thing I always say about, podcasting, and I've been very consistent for 400 episodes, is I don't force the creativity. I don't. If it's not there, if it doesn't feel right when I start talking, because there's no editing. Like I'll put music behind my voice, but there's no editing. If you mess up a word, you just mess it up. Nah, but yeah, as long as I can do it, I'm gonna keep doing it. And as long as there's something to talk about, which there always is, at least for me, always something to talk about. And the plan is just to keep giving you dope shit. Keep giving you dope episodes week in and week out. That's the goal. That's what I've done for 400 episodes. And that's what I'm going to do to get to 500. Ladies and gentlemen, that's going to do it for me. Thank you for checking out this special edition, the 400th episode of the 12 Kyle podcast. My name is 12 Kyle. I'll catch you guys next time. 5,000.